A pleasant day to everyone. We are the Group 7 and we are going to be discussing about the fiscal rules. First, let me introduce myself. I'm Mirania Angela Di Paran and I am the first reporter for the group. Let us first know what is fiscal rules. So fiscal rules are government-imposed limits on spending, borrowing, debt, or budget deficits to maintain financial discipline and economic stability. To simply put, these are government-imposed limits sa pag-spend, sa pag-borrow, or like sa kakulungan sa budget. So, fiscal rules, think of it as a financial diet na boundaries ang government na dapat nilang ma-follow para ma-maintain ang financial capability o economic stability. So yun na yung types sa fiscal rules. Number 1 here is the expenditure rules o ang pagtatakda ng limitations or what we call as ceiling on what the government or how much the government can only spend. Now, paano ito ginagawa? So, the government sets limit on growth spending or they focuses on specific sectors or they adjust to the inflation or the GDP or what we call as the gross domestic product. A great example for this is that every year naga-create ang government og NEP or the National Expenditure Program para mabalaan nila or makaset sila og hard ceiling or boundaries or limit on what the government or how much the government can only spend for an entire year. So now, what are the challenges for expenditure rules? It is hard to define spending boundaries because there is always a political pressure to spend more, and it greatly affects on how they deliver public service. A great example for this is the recent controversy, which is the flood control budget and the infrastructure spending. So first challenge is that because of the political pressure, billions of pesos are being constantly pushed into local infrastructure projects. So mag-allocate sila og grabe kadako nga amount or funds para and that specific area. Secondly, because of this, it's very hard to define spending boundaries between what is a necessary, well-planned project versus a politically motivated project nga eventually mag-lead siya into budget irregularities. Lastly, when the government tried to fix this by slowing down the released funds being used, a lot of real existing projects is na-stop gid siya, and it really affected how the public service delivers. The second type is that we have the revenue rules. So these set targets or limits on how the government collects money through taxes. So there are 3 ways para mabuhat ang revenue rules. The first one here is ginasiguro sa gobyerno nga sakto lang or enough lang ilang gina-collect nga buwis from us para lang makasabay sila sa paglambo sa ekonomiya or what we call as the ratio to GDP. Second, this protects us Filipinos by limiting lang kung magkano lang or kung kailan lang nila pwede nga mag-increase sa tax. And pangatlo, nagagahin dapat og emergency funds or stabilization funds ang gobyerno para sa atong nasod para if ever natay sudden crisis ka-experience or ma-experience is na ay ready to use nga pondo ang gobyerno and ma-sustain ang ato ang living. What are the challenges for this? If sobra ka strict or i-permanent na nila nga dili dapat mag-increase og tax, naagya pa siya consequences. So maghirap gyapon ang atong gobyerno because wala sila enough funds para mapundo sa mga public hospitals, mga free medicines, and sa mga salaries, sa mga, as what I've said earlier, magkulang ang pondo para sa mga salaries sa nurse, public teachers, and other government staff.
So the another type of fiscal rules is budget balance rules. Focus on controlling the government's budget deficit. A deficit happens when the government spends more than it earns. These rules help make sure spending stays under control. So the main design features including the deficit to GDP ratio limit, where the government sets a limit on how big the deficit can be compared to the economy. Another is structural balance target, which aim to keep the budget stable even during economic changes. There are also balanced budget amendments, which require the government to keep its budget balance. However, there are also challenges. These rules can restrict cyclical policy, meaning the government has less freedom to increase spending during crisis. It's also hard to separate structural and cyclical factors in the economy. Lastly, it may cause a pro-cyclical effect where spending cuts can make economic problems worse. So the another type of fiscal rule is debt rules. Debt rules focus on controlling government debt to keep it sustainable. So the design features include debt to GDP ratio ceilings which set a limit on total government debt compared to the economy. Another is limits on foreign currency debt to reduce risk from exchange rate changes. These are also debt service to revenue ratios, which measure how much government income is used to pay debt. So the challenge of debt rules is includes slow adjustment to economic changes, possible restriction on long-term investment like infrastructure, and the risk of debt is restructuring if debt becomes too high. Now let's move to classification of fiscal rules. So first are national fiscal rules. These are rules created and implemented within one country. The government itself decides and applies these rules to manage its economy. Second are supranational fiscal rules. So these are rules imposed by international organizations or unions. Countries that belong to this group are expected to follow common fiscal policies. Third are permanent rules. These are long-term rules that stay in effect continuously to maintain financial discipline and stability. Lastly, temporary rules are rules used only during special situations such as economic crises, pandemics, or emergencies. Once the situation improves, these are rules may be removed.
My name is Shannon Nasoor, and my topic is Fiscal Policy refers to government decision on taxation and spending to influence the economy. So, fiscal policy is the way the government use tax and spending to help the economy stay stable and healthy. The government can increase or decrease spending and tax depending on the country economic situation. Macroeconomic stability means keeping the economy balanced by controlling problems like inflation, unemployment, and slow economic growth. Here's how fiscal policy help control inflation. If prices become too high, the government may reduce spending or increase tax so people spend less money. Reduce employment. During economic slowdown, the government can spend more on projects and service to create jobs. Promote economic growth. Government spending on roads, school, hospital, help business and people become more productive. Stabilize the economy. Fiscal policy help the economy avoid extreme up and down. If many people lost jobs during a crisis, the government may reduce financial assistance or create public projects to people earn money or people earn more money. So in short, fiscal policy is important because help maintain a stable economy and improve people's lives.
Good afternoon, ma'am. I am Althea May R. Camara, and I am the fourth reporter of the Group 7. So my part of our report is the type of fiscal policy and the difference between developed countries and the developing countries. Difference between developed and developing countries. First is the developed countries. Developed countries usually have strong implementation and monitoring system because they have stable governments, advanced technology, and enough financial resources. This country can effectively enforce laws, manage public programs, and monitor economic activities For example, countries like Japan and Germany use efficient systems to track government spending and ensure accountability and transparency. The second is developing countries. It is often struggle to economic and political limitation. It is often struggle with implementation and monitoring because limited budgets, weaker institutions, corruption, and political instability. These challenges make it difficult to properly manage public programs and enforce policies. For example, some developing countries may experience delays in infrastructure projects or misuse of public funds due to insufficient monitoring systems and resources. Types of fiscal policy. The first one is expansionary fiscal policy. It is increased spending and lower taxes, and it is used during recession. This fiscal policy is used by governments during economic recessions to stimulate economic growth. It involves increasing government spending and reducing taxes to encourage businesses and consumers to spend more money. This creates jobs and boosts demand in the economy. For example, governments may fund infrastructure projects or provide tax cuts during economic downturns. The second type of fiscal policy is the contractionary fiscal policy. It is a reduced spending and higher taxes used during inflation. This fiscal policy is used to control inflation and slow down excessive economic growth. Government reduces public spending and increases taxes to decrease the amount of money circulating in the economy. This helps stabilize prices and prevent overheating. For example, a government may increase income taxes or reduce unnecessary spending during periods of high inflation.
Good day everyone, my name is Hardin Palma and my topic is about fiscal rules in developing versus developed countries. So fiscal rules are government policies that control spending, borrowing, and debt to keep the economy stable. However, fiscal rules are applied differently in developing and developed countries because their economic situations are different. So first is developing countries. It is usually have lower income levels and weaker tax collection system. For examples are countries like the Philippines and Bangladesh that sometimes rely on loans from other countries or international organizations to support infrastructure and public services. Because of weak institution and political instability, it can be difficult to strictly follow fiscal rules. During economic crisis, government may borrow more money to support their people. Despite these challenges, fiscal rules help improve investor confidence and encourage responsible budgeting. While on the other hand, developed countries such as the United States, Japan, and Germany have stronger economies, stable institutions, and better financial management system. These countries can implement and monitor fiscal rules more effectively because they have better transparency and accountability. However, they also face challenges like, for example, Japan has a large public debt because of high government spending for its aging population. So overall, the slide shows that both developing and developed countries use fiscal rules to maintain economic stability, but developing countries face more difficulties in implementation, while developed countries generally have stronger system for enforcing fiscal discipline.
Good day, ma'am. I am Jessa S. of Chabo from Group 7, the next reporter. So, my topic is all about the escape clause and flexibility in fiscal rules. Escape clause are provisions that allow temporary suspension or adjustment of fiscal rules during emergency. Purpose of escape clauses. They provide flexibility when unexpected events occur such as natural disasters, economic recession, pandemics, wars, or national emergencies. Importance. Allows emergency government spending, prevents economic collapse during crisis, makes fiscal rules more realistic and adaptable. Rest. Governments may abuse escape clauses, can lead to excessive borrowing if poorly monitored. So, Ang explanation ng both sa escape clause kay kuan siya kanang escape clause are special provision in fiscal rules that allow the government to temporarily stop, change, or adjust these rules when serious or unexpected events happen. Example, during the COVID-19 pandemic 2020 to 2022, the Philippines had a fiscal rules limiting the budget deficit to 3% of GDP. Because the pandemic was a national emergency, the government used the escape clause to temporarily exceed this limit, reaching deficits of over 7% to fund healthcare, vaccine, and cash aid like PORPIS and SAP for millions of Filipinos. Once the crisis is, the government returned to following the original deficit limit. Escape clause balance discipline and flexibility. They keep rules effective but allow the government to act fast when the country needs it most.
So last is fiscal transparency and accountability mechanism. But first, allow me to introduce myself. I am Princess Hines Palsis and the last reporter of the Group 7. So, fiscal transparency means the government openly shares information about money, like taxes, budget, and spending with the public. For example, the government posts its yearly budget online so people can see where the money goes. So, accountability mechanisms are ways to make sure government officials use public money honestly and correctly. For example, an agency checks if government funds were used properly for building roads or schools. So there are 5 common accountability mechanisms, and first is public financial reports. So the government publishes reports about budget and spending. For example, the Department of Finance released a report showing how tax money was spent. So second is independent audit. So auditing agency examine government spending to check for mistake or corruption. For example, an audit team checks if funds for a bridge project were used correctly. So third is legislative oversight. So Congress or Parliament monitors government financial activities. For example, senators question officials about missing funds during a hearing. Fourth is participation. So citizens are allowed to join discussions and access budget information. For example, people attend a public meeting to give opinions about the city budget. So last is anti-corruption agencies. So special agency investigate misuse of public funds. Examples, an anti-corruption agency investigates an official accused of stealing government money. So that's all. Thank you.